Hey, how's it going? Today I wanted to talk about confidence, and that is something that pretty much every single one of my clients comes to me wishing that she had more of. And I feel like it's just something that a lot of women in general wish they had more of. And I used to think that confidence was something that either you had or it was something that you had to work really hard to develop. So, for example, when I was working as a business process consultant, right out of college, I had all of the self doubt, right? I had the imposter syndrome. Like, why did I get hired for this job? I was an art history and psychology major, and everybody else at the table was an economics major or a political science major. Anyway, I digress. And so I had a serious lack of confidence, and there were people there who were my age who just seemed to be just naturally confident. And I thought, okay, well, I'm sure it's something that I can develop. Being raised in the 70s and 80s, it was all about self esteem and building self esteem. And so confidence always seemed to be kind of this thing that eluded me. And then I learned more about it. Fast forward 20 years later, I learned more about it and where it actually comes from. And I love to ask my clients where they think confidence comes from. Um, because it's really interesting, these messages that we're socialized with about how to build confidence. So, anyway, confidence, yeah, I think there are some people who just have kind of a naturally confident edge to them for whatever reason. If it's nature, if it's nurture, they just have that ability. Um, the rest of us can learn it, which is awesome. So, confidence is self confidence, I should say, is really believing in yourself no matter what. And so, it's not necessarily like, oh my gosh, I can go into any situation and rock it, right? So, there's confidence in doing specific tasks. Like, I'm confident that 98% of the time I can pour a glass of water and not make a huge mess. I am confident that I can draw a circle and it somewhat looks like a circle. I'm confident that I can put my pants on in the morning. You get the idea. And then self-confidence is kind of more of a general thing. So in general, self-confidence means that you have your own back no matter what. So I love that phrasing. I learned that from my coach. And having your own back basically means that no matter what happens, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, you'll have your own back. You won't beat yourself up. So many of my clients come to me and they feel like they have a serious lack of confidence. And then I hear them talk, and all it is beating themselves up. And that's not because they're doing anything wrong. We're raised as women to be self deprecating, right? When we start talking about confidence, more often than not, my clients are like, oh, well, but I don't want to brag, or I don't want to seem like, now I'm forgetting the word, but I don't want to seem like I'm too full of myself. And it's so interesting how women and girls are taught to be humble and not to brag, right? Not to be bossy, not to be leaders, even. So, anyway, no wonder we have a warped sense of where confidence comes from and how to develop it. So, I always start when I'm working with my clients on developing their self confidence with self trust. And self trust is basically having your own back in any situation, like I was just talking about. So imagine all of the times that you've said something in a meeting, for example, and you're like, shit, why did I say that? Everybody's going to think I'm stupid. They're going to know I don't belong here. Our brains are really mean to us, right? Or it's all the times that you said something to somebody else and then you stress about it later and you think, oh my gosh, did I offend them? Are they mad at me? Am I upset? So being confident means that you do the thing and then you don't beat yourself up about it later. So I like to reckon confidence to learning how to play tennis. So I had some tennis lessons when I was a kid, and I kind of grew up sort of playing tennis, but it wasn't until high school that my best friend and I were like, we're going to learn how to play tennis. And it was hard, right? Like eye hand coordination and being able to get yourself across the court to be able to get the ball. There's learning involved. Very few people are born knowing how to play tennis. And so back in high school and even college in my early 30s, if I couldn't do something really well automatically, I would get angry and I would stop doing it. Snowboarding is a classic example of that. If anybody has learned how to snowboard, you know that it takes a few days for your body just to get the mechanics of it down. Well, I tried snowboarding for the first time in college, also with the same friend that I learned how to play tennis with. And I just got mad the whole time because you're falling down, it hurts, it's hard to get back up after a while, you're exhausted, your arms are tired after pushing yourself back up. And I hated it. And then I totally beat myself up because I really wanted to learn how to snowboard and I wanted to be able to do it. It looked like a ton of fun. But the learning of it was so flipping hard. So anyway, I digress. The whole point of that story is that my friend and I dubbed that whole, like, if I can't do it well, I'm not going to do it attitude is the tennis attitude. And we still talk about the tennis attitude, right? Like learning to do different things. Oh, the tennis attitude came up. And so I just got mad. So anyway, the tennis attitude is the opposite of confidence because self-confidence means that you're not going to beat yourself up regardless of what you say or do, regardless of how stupid you think it is. Um, on the other side of doing it, you'll have compassion with yourself. And that's self-trust, and that's the foundation of self-confidence. Um, and when I introduce that to clients, a lot of them say, well, does that mean I just say whatever I want to people and I don't worry about their feelings? No, obviously not. You're not going to go around being a jerk. But for most women, I'm not concerned about that because we're already so concerned about what other people think of us and how other people feel that we're not going to go suddenly willy-nilly acting like jerks to everybody. All I mean is that you're not going to, I want to think of a different phrase than beat yourself up, but you're not going to be mean to yourself after you say something that you think is stupid. Um, so there's a difference, right? And I'm sure that you all have been in meetings with other people where they say something and you just think, wow, that was that wasn't the smartest thing I've ever heard. But the person just keeps going like it's no big deal. Whereas if you said the same thing, you would be beating yourself up for like the next 6 weeks. And that is where confidence comes in because you can say the thing, you can realize that maybe it wasn't the smartest thing, you can learn from it and then just let it go, right? One of my clients, she was like, I just wish I had the confidence of a mediocre white man. And I was like, you are so right. So I love that. Um, Anyway, okay, so how do you develop self-trust? So one of the ways to develop self-trust, think about like building a friendship with yourself. How would you build a friendship with any new person that you meet? Well, you follow through on what you say you're going to do. You build trust with that person. So building trust with yourself is the same thing. The first thing is following through on commitments to yourself. So a lot of us, when we make a commitment to ourselves, like say you make a commitment to go to the gym 3 times a week, and then something comes up and somebody needs you, and so that's the first thing to go is your commitment to yourself. Or if you have a commitment to get up early and start a morning practice, you have a commitment to reading 20 minutes a day. Whatever your commitment to yourself is, it's usually the first thing to go when somebody else needs something. So that is not the way to build self-trust. The way to build self-trust is treat a commitment to yourself like you would treat a commitment to somebody else. So you have a coffee date with a friend, you're very likely going to uphold that coffee date with a friend. Realizing that those of us with social anxiety and anxiety in general, sometimes a coffee date with a friend is a difficult commitment. But in general, your commitments to yourself are important. So if you're going to commit to doing something for yourself, put it on your calendar and treat it just like a commitment to another person and follow through on it. Excuse me, that's the first step to building self-trust. And that was a big eye-opener for me because I was the classic self, commitment canceler. So I would tell myself I would go to the gym after work, but then I would feel guilty and feel like I needed to be at home with my husband and daughter. So I would just go home. I would flake on myself. However, if I had a commitment to meet somebody else at the gym, then I would go because then it's about somebody else, right? Um, so commit to yourself, honor your commitments, and you'll see that self-trust start to blossom. Another way to build self-trust is to learn to process regret. So regret is kind of another form of beating yourself up, right? You do something in the past and then you feel regret because you're thinking that what you did was wrong. Um, yeah, usually that's the thought that drives regret, right? Is that I did something wrong. But that's in the past. And by continuing to live through it in your brain, all you're doing is continuing to beat yourself up. So the antidote to regret is forgiveness. So the more that you can forgive yourself for things that you've regretted and move on, the more self-trust you'll develop. And I know there's that fear of, well, if I just do whatever I want and then I forgive myself, how many other people am I going to hurt? You're probably not going to do that, right? It just means that being a human is hard enough as it is. And if we continue going through the past and dredging out things that we did in the past to beat ourselves up about them in the present, that's just mean, right? You're usually not going to go to a friend and be like, remember that time 20 years ago when you said this thing? That was dumb. Remember when you unwittingly did this thing and it hurt somebody's feelings 15 years ago? Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's feel crappy about that. Forgive yourself. Learn to process the regret. Processing emotions is something I work with clients on all the time. Learn to process the regret, forgive yourself, and move on. Build self-trust. Stop beating yourself up. Another way to build self-trust is to make friends with your inner critic. So, you know, that voice, that inner mean girl, some people call it, that voice inside of your head that's always telling you, like, you're not doing enough, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, all the variations of not enoughness. A lot of people think they need to drown out their inner critic, or they listen to their inner critic, or they think they need to ignore their inner critic. But really, your inner critic is like a toddler. And imagine if you've ever had a toddler in your life before, if you ignore them, if you ignore their demands, they're just going to get louder. If you try to drown out their demands, they're going to have a meltdown. And so really the best thing with a toddler is to be a loving presence, hear them out, right? When your toddler's having a meltdown because they wanted 6 peas on their plate rather than 7, then instead of trying to argue with them or instead of trying to ignore them, which is what we do with our inner critic, right? You just lovingly explain why they have 7 peas. Or if you're like me, you probably would just take 1 pea away and eat it and call it good. But anyway, that gets us away from the metaphor. So the inner critic is part of your brain. It's not going away. And you can't drown it out. You can't ignore it. But you also don't need to let it run the show. So another key to building self-trust and having your back in any situation is learning to play well with your inner critic. So to recap, the fundamental building block for confidence is self-trust. And self-trust is basically not beating yourself up, really, no matter what, not beating yourself up. Yes, you can learn from mistakes, you can grow, but you're not going to keep dredging yourself through the pain of making mistakes and regret without doing some serious damage to your confidence, right? So, building self-trust means honoring commitments to yourself, following through when you make a commitment to yourself, and totally lost my train of thought, sorry. Forgiving yourself, not holding on to regret, and learning to manage your inner critic. So if you have any questions, drop me a note, or if you have any ahas, I love to hear those too. And I'll look forward to talking more about confidence later on.